Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, I finally received my bulb orders, so today is planting day. I know this doesn't look like very many bulbs, but there's actually 85 of them here. Why do I do this to myself? But I've got some rock garden irises that are gorgeous, pale blues and blue and lime colored ones. I have an Asiatic lily called Forever Susan. I don't normally do that, but I saw that name and I thought, I have to get that one. I also have some foxtail lilies or aramuris, and those are in a lovely peach color. I've got Crown Imperial fritillaries. Those are monster ones. Those are those large bulbs in the upper right corner there. I've got two kinds of species tulips that are really cool. One is called Artist, and it's a coral color with green on the petals. I just had to get that one. And then a beautiful yellow one. And then there's one thing on the table there that is not technically a bulb. It is a peony called Red Charm. It's one that I saw in England a couple of years ago, and I thought I have to have this peony. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to get that one planted today too. Now when you're getting ready to plant bulbs, there are quite a few things you need to take into account. What I did here is I created this chart showing everything that I need to plant. And so I've got the name and the colors, the quantity that I need to plant, how tall they're expected to be, and they really range, as you can see, from 4 inches up to 72 inches. The depth they need to be planted at. Are they resistant to deer and or rodents? That is very important where I live because I live in a very rural area and we get everything. And then where roughly that I want to plant the bulbs. I'm going to be kind of winging it a little bit, but I do have some notions of where things need to go. And then the time of year that they will bloom, because if you think about it, if there are other plants that are going to be up nice and tall and kind of in the way of your being able to view the bulbs, that can be a problem. And so you want to think about the time of year they will bloom so that you get the maximum enjoyment out of your bulbs. Now, the reason I have written where these bulbs are going based on whether they're going in the backyard or the front yard is because mainly the deer problem that we have. So the backyard has a deer fence that runs around it. And so if I have something that deer love, for example, tulips, I need to plant that behind the deer fence because they think tulips are candy. And so do gophers. And so I have to be real careful in the backyard where I put the tulips because the more rural, shall we say, our backyard gets, the farther it goes south, the more there are gophers or the potential for gopher problems. So that's why I've written that down. So make sure that you take these items into account that I just mentioned because all of them will affect your ability to see them when they're blooming, which is what we're all going for, right? And also to get maximum enjoyment. This is our large front perennial bed, and you'll notice that part of it is in the shade already, and that's because the sun is farther to the south in the sky, and so that ground in the shade is quite frozen. Yikes! Fortunately, what I want to plant is in a little bit of the sunlight, and so I'm hoping it won't be an issue for planting those bulbs. First of all, I'm going to plant the rock garden irises in the front of the bed because they're just between 6 and 12 inches, so I want to make sure I can see them. And then I'm also going to get that Red Charm peony planted. Well, I've got this lovely little patch of sunshine here, and thank heavens for that because I've tested and I can get into the soil for the depth that I need, so phew. But right next to it, look at this frozen ground. Man. So I'm hoping you can't hear my husband Bill using our tractor in the background, but we're frantically trying to get everything done before a rainstorm that's coming, and then the temperatures are going to drop dramatically. So The thing that I mentioned earlier about the height of plants, these are Sheila Ann rock garden irises. They will grow 6 to 12 inches, so I want them fairly close to the front. I'm taking into account that I've got a daylily over here, that should be fine, and a bearded iris here, so we should be okay. And I thought what I'd do is take these 10 bulbs and divide them into 2 groups of 5. I think that will work well. They need to be 3 inches deep and planted 4 to 6 inches apart. And most importantly, I have made myself plant tags, not for each individual bulb, but for groupings of bulbs to remind myself this is where I have planted them. I think that's a really important thing to do. Now, to plant the bulbs, I'm going to use this tool, which is called a dibble or a dibber, and it punches holes really easily into the soil. As you can see, I'm going about the right depth there and planting this bulb into the hole. You'll notice there is a flat end where the roots were coming out and a pointed end. So the pointed end gets planted facing up. And in it goes. Boy, some of this soil is pretty hard. There's a couple. Trying to do the spacing about right. I'm really excited about these ones. I think they're going to be beautiful. And there's that. Pretty simple. And I've got my plant tags, so as soon as I fill in the holes, I'm going to put this right in the middle. It's so easy to forget where something is once it's been buried. This time I'm in the shade, but fortunately the soil is very workable, so that's good. This is where I want to plant that red charm peony. And you might recall from a video a few weeks ago, I was redoing an area of this front bed, and I mentioned about how you need to plant peonies very carefully. If you plant them too deeply, they will not bloom for you, ever. So that is really important to know. So you see these white areas, these are called eyes. This is where the flowering stalks will come up next spring, which is very exciting. And when I looked at this piece, I thought, okay, which direction does this go? But you can tell that someone has cut off these stalks here, so I'm going to plant it facing up like this. And you do not want these to be lower than 2 inches below the soil surface. So I've dug a hole here. I'm going to put it in, and I think it needs to go a little bit more deeply. I definitely want them to bloom. So let's go ahead and put this in. Like so. And that'll be nice. I can see something's growing here. There, that should be all right. And then I have a tag for this one because this is so important. And I have high hopes for this peony, so I definitely want to know where it is for later. Now, before I move to the backyard to plant the rest of the bulbs, I wanted to mention something. In a video a while back, I mentioned how I was using some mole chaser as a repellent for pocket gophers and meadow voles. And it has granules in it that are coated with castor oil. Those granules repel those rodents, but they are not safe to use around edible crops, so you need to know that. However, something I didn't realize is that plant skid makes a repellent that is good for meadow voles, which is fantastic. I've always thought of this as a great deer repellent, and it is, but the fact that it also repels different types of rodents is awesome. So this is not made from any kind of castor oil product, so it's safe to use around edible crops, fruits, berries, vegetables, and so on. And the thing is, you don't want to sprinkle it onto the actual part of the plants that you will be eating, but you can sprinkle them around the plants. And so I definitely want to use this out in this bed. I'm going to do a little bit more cleanup before I do to expose more soil. But last winter we had a horrible problem in this bed with meadow voles and pocket gophers. And so this is going to be my salvation. I'm in our backyard now and in an area that I'm starting to do some new plantings in. Last year we had a huge tree back here. It was an alpine fir and it was dying, and we knew we had to have it taken out, which is really a shame. But suddenly I had this big open area, which on the one hand was exciting because it was more area to plant. However, there's not a very beautiful background here. You can see our deer fence, you can see our workshop in the background, and I thought I really want to block this view. So our plan had been to put this fence panel here as a bit of a backdrop, and we were going to buy 3 or 4 tall decorative trellises to have across. And then I've got these shrubs and a couple of roses growing here. Well, because of COVID, we couldn't get any trellises. They were just sold out everywhere, and the only ones we could find were too small. We need something tall and wide. So I'm trying to ignore that fact. I'm hoping to get the trellises next year. And in here, I want room for perennials, but I also wanted to plant some Crown Imperial fritillaries, which I'll show you in just a moment. And they're going in over here in a clump. And what I like about them is they repel rodents, and we always get gophers coming into here during the winter months, so I want to solve that problem. And then I also want to plant some foxtail lilies in here, and their roots are kind of wide, so I have to mark very carefully where they've been planted. So let's get going on those. Now the first thing I wanted to show you is these Crown Imperial fritillaries. These bulbs are very strange looking. You can see they're a pretty good size, and see how there's an opening in here. That is where the flower stalk comes out, and it has kind of scales to it, similar to a lily. And also you can see some little things emerging here, and initially I thought, okay, are those sprouts? Are those roots? What are they? But this is where the roots came out of the bulb before. So this side goes down, this side goes up, but it goes further than that. I had to research like crazy to see, how do you put a bulb in the soil? Do you plant it straight up? And everything that I found said no, plant them tilted a little bit. And that's because of this depression here. Water can fill in here during the winter months, especially if you live in a very rainy area, and the bulb can rot. So you want to tip it a little bit when you plant it. The stem will still figure out how to go straight up. So I've picked a spot for these bulbs, and I wanted to show you this one. Look at that. It is just weird with these things coming out, but this is definitely the right spot to point up. So I gave them a little bit of space because the plants will be pretty good size, and the bulbs need to be planted 5 to 6 inches deep. So I'm not using my dibber for something that is that large in diameter. You know, I'm really excited about growing these. I've wanted to grow them for years, especially because of their rodent repelling qualities. But the bulbs are expensive. So when I got a deal for 5 of them, I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm just going to go a little bit deeper here. And in this case, I am going to mark where each bulb is planted, just to be on the safe side, especially since they are expensive. I don't want to put a spade right down through the middle. Okay, that looks good. The next bulbs are Aramuris or foxtail lilies. I've seen them growing in gardens and they are just beautiful. These ones are going to be a lovely peach color. You might think they look a little bit like an octopus or maybe a spider. But the important thing to note is these green sprouts growing out of the top of the bulb, so obviously that gets pointed facing upward. If you look on the bottom side of a bulb, there's nothing here that looks like it needs to be pointing up, does it? It just doesn't look like it's going to be sprouting from that side. Now I had to research this one as well because it has an unusual planting technique. So let's do those next. It's probably pretty hard to see where I've placed the bulbs, but there's one here, here, and here. I've started to do the hole. Because foxtail lilies will grow close to 6 feet tall, I felt it was important to put them towards the back of the bed. And then they have this unusual planting method. So the first thing you need to do is to dig a fairly deep hole that is a little bit wider than the width of the roots. So again, here's what this plant looks like. I've got a nice little ground beetle in here. You don't want this green tip to be any lower than 1 inch below the soil surface. So that's important. And in order to accomplish that, what I want to do is a little mound in the middle that the bulb lays on. So first let me get this hole a little bit deeper. Okay, so this is plenty deep. Here's the width. Okay, so that'll accommodate that. And I'm going to put a little mound in the middle. I know this sounds kind of backwards here, but that's how all of the ones that I looked at were being planted. So I would say that's about the right depth, and it's on top of this little mound. There we go. It's the first one I've ever planted, so bear with me. So there it is. And what I'm going to do is leave that open for now so I can see it. So I'll start working on this next one. Okay, now you can see all 3 in the holes, and I have decided to mark where each one is pretty close to where the green sprout is without stabbing any of these roots. But this way I'll remember where they're planted precisely, and then I'm just going to fill in the holes. So there's 1, there's number 2, and number 3. I'll definitely have to show you how these look next year because I'm really excited about them. There we go. Now this flower bed primarily is planted with roses, but I also have some wonderful perennials in here. It's right off the deck on the back side of the house, and I thought, wouldn't this be a great spot to put those Asiatic lilies called Forever Susan? I know I'm never going to hear the end of that, but this would be a perfect spot. Now they need quite a bit of depth. They get planted about 6 inches deep, and they should be planted roughly a foot apart. So that's where they're going to go. This is what the lily bulbs look like, just in case you're curious. You can see they're made up of a lot of different scales, and that is one way to propagate them. Here you can see the scales point up and the roots go on the downside. And once again, I'm a little worried about forgetting these are in here for this first time. So I'm going to put a tag. You know, I don't like to have a lot of tags, but fortunately, this flower bed is pretty bushy, and so I don't think folks will see them. But they will see the lilies because they're quite tall, usually about 3 feet. So that'll be great. Okay, I have freed up some space at one of the edges of the same bed, and I want to plant some of the other irises and those beautiful artist tulips that are the coral with green on the petals. I'm so excited about them. So tulips actually need quite a lot of depth. These will need to be planted between 6 and 8 inches, which is pretty deep. And then I've got the Catherine Hodgkin irises, and those need to be planted roughly 4 inches deep. So I thought maybe I might do a little bit of a mix of them. I have to be careful because I know I have some real small bulbs planted along the edge of this bed, and those are Pushkinia, which is a really cool plant. So those are really short plants, and I'm going to put the tulips a little farther back in because they're going to grow between 14 and 16 inches tall. These irises are going to grow 4 to 6 inches, so obviously I do need them closer to the border. Well, I just have one more bag of tulips to do, and I just figured out where I want to put them. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. You know, it is an effort to plant a bunch of bulbs, but when you see how beautiful they are in the spring, especially after the long winters we get, it's worth every minute. I'll see you next week.